We appreciate you allowing us to speak at this event. Our vision as a business is to be a global authority in public cloud governance, and it's therefore crucial that we do as much for the community as we can. Our ultimate goal in today's talk is for at least some people in the room to walk away asking questions that they hadn't asked before, to try and look at the challenge of public cloud security through a slightly different lens. As part of the talk, we'll cover just three things. I'll share some data which we think shows the status quo in terms of how most companies are managing public cloud security today, and some of the observations off the back of that. I'll tell just two short stories that we think reinforce those observations, and then Jabi, our co-founder and VP of engineering, will demonstrate security in the CI/CD pipeline by scanning a Cloudformation template. A lot of research has been done about what encompasses a successful public cloud strategy. A lot of people believe that public cloud security success is equal to the sum of people, process, and technology all working together cohesively. I couldn't agree more. Technology. Does the technology your organization use today help deal with the skills gap that you might potentially have? People. If I was to hire someone new today, are we confident that they'd be able to get up to speed using the technology that we have in place? And process. If we're looking at shifting security left, do we think that we have the technology and people in place to enable this process? The next few slides are from the Cloud Security Alliance report for 2019, and I think what they show essentially is the status quo in terms of how most companies are managing public cloud security today, the challenges that are causing these companies the highest level of concern, and the individuals within these companies that are ultimately responsible for managing security on a day-to-day basis. The findings in this data mirrors exactly what I see on a day-to-day basis, speaking to hundreds of companies at different stages of their public cloud journey. Essentially, what this slide shows is that the vast majority of companies are managing security in the cloud natively, using cloud-native security tools. And most of these organizations are relying solely on cloud-native tools. This slide over here shows the challenges that are causing these same companies the highest level of concern. Proactively detecting misconfigurations and security risks, lack of visibility into the entire cloud estate, compliance and preparing for audits, lack of expertise in a cloud-native security construct, understanding which team is responsible for cloud security. These are the challenges that are causing these companies the highest level of concern. In our opinion, these are some of the most important aspects of an effective public cloud strategy. So our question, does the fragmented nature of using cloud-native tools in isolation make it hard to detect misconfigurations and security risks? I question whether using cloud-native tools in isolation makes it hard to achieve visibility of your entire estate. And I question whether using cloud-native tools in isolation is just not easy, and if that's the case, whether it doesn't help the lack of expertise in a cloud-native extract. Let me stress, I think that cloud service providers have done an unbelievable job in creating native security services for almost every use case that you could possibly imagine. And I also think that they do everything that they can to educate users on how to use them. However, using cloud-native tools is just not easy, especially if you're an organization that hasn't been born in the cloud with a cloud-native mindset. Jabi and our other two co-founders started Cloud Conformity when they moved a large government agency in Australia from the private cloud into the public cloud. This was a company that had a lot of skilled individuals and a ton of resources. When they got to the point where they were building out the security foundations, they truly didn't believe that these individuals had the ability to manage security using cloud-native tools only. Again, let me stress, I'm not saying that cloud-native tools are bad. In fact, I think quite the opposite. And I think if you ever use a third-party tool, it has to be a tool that works cohesively with cloud-native tools by being able to integrate the two. But what I'm saying is that I think you should be questioning the gaps. A lot of companies are already doing this. They're using open source tools, they're using third-party products. I think you should be questioning the gaps in those tools as well. And I don't think you should be questioning the gaps in terms of just the technology. You should be doing it in terms of the people and the process that you have in place. And I don't think you should be doing it in terms of just what the infrastructure looks like today, but what the infrastructure and internal internal structure will likely look like in 12 months' time. This slide over here shows the teams that are responsible for managing security in the public cloud. Again, I think there's a lack of cohesiveness between technology, people, and process. Why are just 6% of DevOps individuals responsible for security in the cloud? Why are just 4% of CISOs responsible for security in the cloud? I speak to DevOps individuals who tell me that they're not responsible for any security aspect of build. I speak to other DevOps individuals who tell me that they're not responsible for any security at build, but the security process in their organization slows them down significantly. I've spoken to CISOs who have said to me they're not actually quite sure what's going on from a security standpoint within their public cloud. I've spoken to the engineering team at those same companies who have told me they've gone from spending $50,000 a month to $500,000 a month as well. So the first story I'll tell is about a customer of ours who are in the top 3 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. They came to us when they had 250 AWS accounts, and at that time were using just cloud-native tools. And the challenges that they were facing were many of the challenges that I've just mentioned. The key thing for them was that they needed to have visibility of all 250 of those accounts in one place. They also knew that they needed to identify security risks and remediate those vulnerabilities far quicker than they were today. They were also under significant pressure to be able to pull reports showing everything that they were doing within their AWS environment in relation to compliance standards. For them in particular, it was HIPAA. And they were a company that went from one AWS account to 250 very quickly. So the majority of skills and experience within their organization was actually in a data center environment. When they plugged their accounts into Cloud Conformity, their scores on each account against both the 5 pillars of the AWS well-architected framework and specific compliance standards was well below average, especially for the healthcare industry. Success for them was measured in the fact that in quite a short space of time, they were able to increase the score on each account from an average of 60% per account to around 90% per account. They're able to get visibility of every one of their AWS accounts in one place. They're able to pull reports against HIPAA, showing everything they're doing within AWS in relation to HIPAA within seconds. And they've been able to improve the speed of identifying new security risks by an average of 75% and remediate those threats by an average of 85% faster. The next customer I'd like to talk about is an education management company based out of the States. They have 4,000 employees, they manage 6,000 educational institutions, and they do $1.4 billion in revenue. In January 2007, they decided to embark on digital transformation. And as part of doing that, they made the decision that they were going to move 100% of their infrastructure from data centers into the public cloud, choosing to go all in on AWS. In August of 2017, they started engaging with us, and at that time, they had 10 accounts. At that time, they were using cloud-native security tools and an open source product as well. At that time, they didn't think they were having major challenges, but they had the foresight to think ahead. They knew that in 12 months, their infrastructure was going to be significantly larger, and with digital transformation comes agility and speed, and with agility and speed comes new threats that enter the environment through developer misconfigurations. The key things for them were that they wanted to shift the majority of the responsibility away from an InfoSec team to a much larger DevOps team. One of the challenges that they were facing was with integrations. They knew that in order to make this transition successful, the DevOps individuals needed to be able to receive alerts in the channels that they were comfortable receiving them in. Another challenge that they were facing was with alert fatigue, and they knew that was a problem that they needed to solve. Real-time threat monitoring and auto-remediation was a big part of what they needed to implement. Sorry. Success for them success for them can be seen in the fact that the vast majority of their security is now being managed by their DevOps team and other teams outside of just InfoSec. They were able to, in a short space of time, eradicate false positives by 80%. In the time that they've been using us, they've witnessed real-time threat monitoring pick up when someone's logged into their AWS account without multi-factor authentication, and also when someone's logged in from an unapproved country. They've witnessed auto-remediation when an S3 bucket was made publicly available to the world and closed within seconds. They've also witnessed auto-remediation when CloudTrail was disabled and they saw it be re-enabled within seconds as well. They had 10 accounts when they started working with us. They've now got 169 accounts and 507 users. Let me stress, this is a company with 4,000 employees that have 507 employees using Cloud Conformity. 507 employees that are responsible for security in one way or another. The majority of those are in the DevOps team, but many of them are not in an InfoSec team. And this is not a technology company. They consider their digital transformation and cloud journey to be an overwhelming success. I think a huge part of the success for them was their mindset, the ability to think ahead, the ability to challenge the status quo even when they couldn't see major challenges, and the ability to have a bunch of experts retain a beginner's mind. The last thing I'd like to talk about before handing over to Jabi is shifting security left to the earlier stages in the development lifecycle. Companies are becoming agile. Companies want to spin things up, test, move fast. The number of items that you ship into production seems to be a very important metric for a lot of DevOps teams these days, one that a lot of them wear as a badge of honor. However, we know that the vast majority of software has at least one vulnerability. The sooner a developer can identify, view, and fix a flaw, the more efficient it becomes to fix in the software development lifecycle. That is the underlying philosophy of DevOps. The sooner a developer can identify and fix an issue in the software development lifecycle, it not only makes you more resilient as a business, but it also actually makes you build software better and faster. So I'm going to pass over to Jabi. If you guys have any questions through the day, I'm here with my colleagues. We're hosting drinks tonight at Smolenski's, so anyone that can make it, we'd love to have you there. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me okay? Or should I? Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to present the template, Cloudformation template scanning. Before doing so, I'll just introduce what the tool does and give you guys a bit of one or two value props so you understand the context of the tool, and then we're going to jump into this, this new thing, really. So what the tool does, it's a continuous assurance tool. Essentially, it's a rule engine that is 500 rules strong and really ensures that your AWS accounts are compliant with 500 best practices. When I say compliant, it could be well-architected framework compliance. It could be about HIPAA compliance. It could be about PCI compliance, different sort of compliances, and mostly best practices. So the tool really is there to help any DevOps person, any security person, any developer to be good at doing cloud. Today is purely AWS. The Azure offering is on the way. So just quickly here, one of the things you can do with Cloud Conformity is that you can essentially have a really quick view into your AWS account, and we are going to sort all the rules about the well-architected framework in order of risk level. So for instance, here you see that there is a lot of S3 buckets that are not really compliant with the internal policy. And so we are going to highlight this. For instance, here, what Justin mentioned about a S3 bucket being publicly accessible, that's probably something you don't want to have. So we are able to detect this. And on top of this, what we can do is that we can actually resolve it. So we have a public knowledge base that is about giving you all the tools you need, all the information you need to actually solve it. So quick rationale about what the rule is, why this is a risk, a very high risk level, and then a way to solve it via the AWS console or via the command line. So really the tool is for experts and juniors. an expert on EC2 may not know about how to best do things on Glue or on S3 or any AWS service. And similarly, a junior person can actually learn throughout the process, learn what is the best practice. To give you an idea of the coverage of our tool in terms of service and rules, we are covering 60 plus AWS services. We have 500 plus different rules, lots of rules around EC2 IAM. So that's the context of the demo today. So imagine so let me ask a question first. Who knows about infrastructure as code? Okay, keep your hands up. Who is using Terraform? And who is using Cloudformation? Okay, so the tool that I'm going to demo today is Cloudformation, only the Terraform version is coming. For those who don't know what infrastructure as code is, imagine you have some cloud workload and you want to be able to create a single source of truth as to how your cloud is going to be architectured. If you are using the console, if you're using clicks or scripts, it's going to be very hard to replicate the same thing from one account to another, from one workload to another. The idea of infrastructure as code is really to represent your infrastructure as if it was some piece of code where you can collaborate, you can improve, you can share it, you can review it, and making sure that multiple people are involved into this production of your infrastructure. And Cloudformation is the AWS service or the underlying AWS service that allows you to deploy instances, S3 buckets, any sort of resource can be represented as code. So what are the AWS users doing with this Cloudformation scripts? Essentially, it goes into the pipeline. A CI/CD pipeline is a way for developers to push things into the cloud or into a production environment. So those kind of Cloudformation templates can actually be code, just like the application, just like any sort of piece of code that goes into the cloud. And now imagine that this CI/CD pipeline has, at some point, a showstopper that will say, I don't want to promote anything into my AWS environments unless I'm sure that I'm 100% PCI compliant, or I'm sure that I'm 100% AWS well-architected framework compliant. So now you can start imagining a way where you can have those controls very early on in the process that will prevent things to happen to begin with. Just imagine how long you're going to spend or how long it's going to pass since a S3 bucket becomes open to the world and your customers' private information is available to anyone on the internet, down to when you actually realize this is happening. You know, this can take months. We've seen some examples where no one knew that some personal information was out, and all of a sudden we realized that it was out and somebody actually copied it over, and actually, I don't know who was that. If you're able to have tools that manage this, gives you visibility into what's out there, and give you the resolution immediately that things should not happen to begin with, that's what the Cloudformation template scanning is. So I'll go to this template scanner here. This is a UI, so just imagine that this is embedded into your CI/CD pipeline, so it's purely API driven. The UI is just here for the demo. So I'm going to pick a Cloudformation template that has few things that could be corrected. So I upload it, and what we can see is that this very first rule, S3 bucket public read, is failing. Essentially, this S3 bucket is open to the world, and this is not something we want. So same thing, you can actually get all the information to resolve it, and here I'm going to resolve it in real time. So this is the incriminating line that should be removed. So let's remove this line, and I'm going to upload this file again. So this time around, the public read access is successful. That's great, but we can see that there are other things that are not really great. For instance, here we have a rule about tagging convention. You should always tag your resources accordingly. This is going to help you manage them. This is going to help you in many ways. So there is a role tag missing. So let's see what's happening here. Yes, this is the wrong key. The role should be storage. So same thing again. I'm going to upload the file, and the result is that, yep, now my resources are all good. They're all passing the CI/CD pipeline. It's going to be up to you to define what's a showstopper, but at least we give you the tools to be able to detect things early instead of putting them into your production environments and realizing 2 months later that something has been introduced that is vulnerable or misconfigured. That's the end of the presentation. We have a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions?
You mentioned that this is for AWS and you got Azure coming on. What's the timeframe for Azure, and do you have GCP on the pipeline?
So Azure is coming live mid-August this year. GCP is coming later this year. And the base offering on Azure, the initial offering will be around 110 rules around the CIS Foundations benchmarks for Azure, and then we will expand this over time. Yeah, over there.
So after it detects those success and failure criteria, is it possible to enforce?
So the question is there a way to enforce that a resource would be deleted, for instance, if non-compliant, right? So we can imagine that we have those clevers saying, hey, as you upload your Cloudformation template, we say, this resource is not compliant, let's remove it. What our tool offers is a kind of the other line or the other end of the spectrum where the resource can effectively go into the environment, but we can have clevers that remove this resource if it's not compliant. Because technically it could be that this resource is really important. If this resource is not present, the whole system can just not function properly. So we have kind of not necessarily preemptive measures, but protective measures and autocorrective measures.
Does that only work with in this case, AWS structure, or with third parties also?
So at the moment is purely AWS Cloudformation. So the Terraform, for instance, is it's more agnostic. There's less reliance on what AWS dictates. I think in the future we'll see more of Terraform, Ansible, and all those kind of infrastructure describing protocols and templates. Yeah.
For Azure, I assume PowerShell will do.
Yeah, similar text. Yeah. Kubernetes is interesting because it's not necessarily directly related to the infrastructure. We can imagine going into this direction, but cloud conformity is really something you plug into your infrastructure and making sure that your cloud resources are configured on the right way. For instance, Kubernetes can be integrating with EKS that would help you finding the best way to configure the underlying service. When it comes to the container itself, we don't want to have access to the configuration of the container. We are going to remain in the infrastructure level. Yeah, but I would see this being expanded across infrastructure, across cloud provider. But yeah, stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Divya.